Hey, Damian Mason here with a question before we hop into this episode of the Business of Agriculture. If you farm for a living, you employ a lot of amazing technology, from your inputs that you put into the soil to the tractor that you sit in, your combine, and the amazing data that it harvests. But has your soil analytics kept up technologically with everything else in your farming operation? I would venture to say that no, it is not. Sure, you check for your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium, your micronutrients as well. But what about disease pressure? Do you know what diseases and what pests you're going to face next year? No, you don't. But you can now figure that out with PatternAg's predictive analytics. Think about it. They can tell you now with testing what the likelihood of facing nasty diseases, things like cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome, what the likelihood of you having this in your field. Then you know how to prepare, how to treat, and where to invest your money. It's using technology to make you bigger yields and therefore make you bigger money. Go to www.pattern.ag to learn more. They are pioneering the way in predictive agronomy. Well, hey there. Thanks for joining us on the Business of Agriculture podcast. Got a great program for you today. We're talking about predictive agronomy. And yes, I do have my sponsor, PatternAg, on here. But no, this is not an infomercial, because you know what? I'll be honest with you, dear listener. The one thing that you know in 280 some episodes of listening to me, you know that I call bullshit when bullshit needs called. If they were out here huckstering and they were out here saying, selling magic rays, I would say, what in the world is that? And I don't believe that, which is why I said, why don't you come on and we actually explain what your concept on predictive agronomy is, because I find it to be pretty fascinating. A little backstory here, dear listener, dear viewer. We all know about soil testing. I've covered it a lot here and on my work with Extreme Ag. We started off, 1940s, 1950s, like, hey, turns out we can go out there and analyze what the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium levels are, the macronutrients. And then all of a sudden it's like, hey, wait, we can even find the micronutrients. But what about disease? And that's where I think this is so fascinating to me. I believe that soil and soil biology is the last frontier. We probably know more about what the hell's happening on Mars right now with rovers up there grabbing stuff than we really know what's happening in the soil. It was described to me once that the bacteria count in a shovel full of soil is so, I can't even give you the number, millions of bacteria we have not identified. So I really believe that soil and our understanding of it is the new frontier. And we're going to, as you've heard me say, dear listener, we're going to look back a decade even from now and say, can you believe they did all this tillage and just beat the crap out of soil structure? Or can you believe, like we look back at using leeches for healthcare as they did a couple centuries ago? I really believe that about soil. So I said, hey, Mike Tweedy, you're the PatternAg guy. Come on here and let's talk about how we actually are finding these pathogens and then treating, because we overuse stuff. We overuse fertility, I think, because it was always cheap. We overuse stuff and we don't need it. That's the idea, I think, of predictive agronomy. I said, come on, explain this to me, because I really believe that we can do some good here. And frankly, we can be better off for the environment, which we're going to see more pressures on that. So I know I've talked too much here, giving you the backlog, but that's what I think we're going to do here, dear listener. And Mike Tweedy with PatternAg is going to tell me, first off, what's predictive agronomy?
Well, thanks for having me on, Damian. Glad to be back again and happy to talk about this. Yeah, predictive agronomy is, if you think about, let's just kind of center everybody. If you think about the way that we currently look at what is happening out in the crop, it's during the season. Many moons ago, I was a tech service rep for a very large input company, and my job was to go out and diagnose what was happening on a crop if it didn't look healthy. And so I would use past observations of, did you have this or did you have that, or what did you apply? What input products did you use? And then you could send samples off to Iowa State University to PIDC and have them diagnosed for whatever disease it was. But you're really doing an autopsy, right? You aren't able to change anything at that point, because the disease or whatever pathogen has already had its impact on it. And so what we do is we use very big data, and we look at what is happening at a microbial level in the soil. And, thanks to our customers, we've already done 200 billion DNA reads, which is the largest metagenomic database in agriculture in the world. And we're using big data to look deep and using deep science to find out what is happening on those fields. Okay.
Wait. You used a couple of words there. I mean, remember, we might have somebody here that is selling, farm machinery. He says, wait a minute, Damian, come on, help me out here. What the hell did he just say about the DNA, et cetera? Go back and just give me the layman's terms on that.
Yep. So in very simple terms, the soil is the most complicated, complex microbiome on Earth, full of all kinds of biology. You cited this at the beginning. 1 shovelful or 1 pound of soil contains 500 billion microbes, 10,000 different species, 50% of those which we haven't even identified. So we're taking a technology that has been around for over 20 years, which is DNA sequencing. It's used to prove innocence or guilt in court. It's used to identify COVID. It's used to identify a number of different things that are happening in the human body. And we map the human microbiome. Okay. We're using that same technology to look into the soil, but for very specific things. And we want to do that before the seed goes into the soil, so we can tell the grower what is happening in each one of their fields, what pathogens exist, what threats are there, what's healthy, and so that they can pre-plan and don't have to go back and do autopsies. So that's what predictive agronomy is. It's looking at the biology in the soil, combining that with weather data and other geophysical data, and then being able to tell the grower, hey, here's what's in your field in a very intuitive way. Here's how you need to plan.
So the pitch, the value proposition, obviously, because you sponsor me, is that, for instance, the most aggressive or most costly pathogens, because let's face it, there's lots of stuff that kills crops, or lots of stuff that should say doesn't kill crop, but it degrades yield. But there's some that are just, it's kind of like, let's treat for the biggies, right? There's 100 things that degrade yield, but let's go after these 5 or 10. And that's like sudden death syndrome, cyst nematode, corn root, help me out here.
Corn rootworm.
Yeah. Those are the biggies you go after. You go after like 6 to 12 things that are the biggies that degrade yield, right?
Well, that's exactly what we do.
And by the way, go after, I think this is important to the listener, Mike. Go after doesn't mean set about killing them. You set about predicting their likelihood.
Yep. We can tell you specifically how many eggs, corn rootworm eggs, are in a pound of soil that gets sent in. We look at 10-acre grids and then we pull composite samples from around that 10-acre grid. And then we look for SDS, corn rootworm, cyst nematode, really big ones that not too many people think about, but Fusarium, Phytophthora, Pythium, and all of those. And we not only tell you if it's there, we tell you how much is there. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting is where you find multiple pathogens at high levels in the same field. And most oftentimes, and we did a very large commercial trial on this year, it's misdiagnosed. It's misdiagnosed in the field, and when it gets sent in, it was diagnosed as sudden death syndrome, but it was actually Pythium. Mm-hmm. It was diagnosed as Pythium, but it was actually sudden death syndrome. Or there were at least 3 pathogens that were there. So what happens is when you have multiple pathogens, and you can see that there is a synergistic effect in terms of potential impact to that crop. So we tell you how much is there. And we tell you, we give you generic recommendations on what to treat and how to treat it.
Yeah, and that's the biggie that you talked about. You were a tech service rep back in the day, and there's always the knock. Okay, this guy comes out from the co-op, and they're here to sell me something, and then they're going to say, well, I went out and walked your field. Here's what I need to buy. And that is prescriptive more than predictive, but it's also, let's face it, it's sales. And so you're actually, what I think is the cool proposition here is you're saying, hey, it turns out you don't need, you're using 3 things that you don't need. You really only need this one thing, right?
That's right. Corn rootworm is a perfect example of that. If you look at the actual amounts of corn rootworm eggs that are out in each one of those fields, it is way overprescribed. Take Illinois, for example, we've got a very big footprint in Illinois. If you get south of Interstate 80, the presence and pressure of corn rootworm is almost non-existent. I wouldn't say zero, but it's very, very low.
Wait a minute, you just said something interesting. south of I-80, Illinois, that's most of Illinois.
Most of Illinois. Yep.
And you're saying most of Illinois does not have much risk for corn rootworm.
It's much, much lower risk than if you got above I-80. Now, Iowa, on the other hand, is it's pretty consistent across the state, but Illinois is kind of different. And then as you move east, the corn rootworm pressure gets a lot less.
Okay, so I'm down in central Illinois, down in God's country, where there's like 14 feet of topsoil, Champaign or something, and I just, as a matter of practice, go out and treat corn rootworm because why not? I'm going to get 260 bushel corn without even trying. That's, the best soils in the world. And I'm going to spend $5 a year treating corn rootworm. And you're going to tell me I'm wasting my money.
Yeah, I mean, we can tell you whether it's there or it's not there. I mean, it's like guilt or innocence. We tell you if it's there, and and it's up to the trusted advisor and the grower to make the decisions on what they want to do. If they want to go ahead and put that stack trait in there, they can. If they want to put an insecticide down, they can, but they don't need to if we're not picking it up at all.
The biggies you test for corn rootworm, cyst nematode, sudden death syndrome, and then there's a couple more.
Oh, yeah. Pythium, Rhizoctonia, brown stem rot. The big ones are white mold, sudden death syndrome, and soybean stem canker. Gibberella stalk rot. We've got a whole number of different pathogens, and they're the big ones. And by the way, we're constantly adding those pathogens, and we'll be adding some big ones for the southern United States, like root knot nematode here this coming season, and that is a major pest in the Delta, Texas, all the way over into the Southeast.
So I got a couple of thoughts on this, Mike. First off, is that we used to, if you sort of look at the healthcare system and kind of call BS on a few things, because I do that. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Big pharma is making a whole bunch of money. We're at 10% of our populace is diabetic, and it's all about, hey, let's figure out how to give you some new drugs for your diabetes as opposed to preventing diabetes, right?
Right.
And so there's that thing about there's a lot of money in treating the problem as opposed to preventing the problem. So I almost wonder if predictive agronomy is likens to preventive agronomy. We're going to figure out how to prevent. You can't prevent the disease from being there. You can prevent unnecessary treatment for a disease that's not there. Is that the right way to look at it?
Yeah, it's like going in and getting a checkup from your doctor. You want to get a head start on what's going to be, what is happening right now in my body. I want to know what's happening in the soil. Right. I want to know what what pathogen loads are going to be there. And one of the things that's in this predictive agronomy report that's going to be coming out is the very strong linkage between spring weather the year before. So going back to spring 2021 and the threat levels that they're going to be these growers are going to be facing when they go to plant in 2022. So we've never really thought about it that way. We've kind of looked back and say, okay, well, what was happening in the field that year? Well, that was actually set up the year before, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at what happened the year before. We're looking at it in the fall because, whatever pathogens that are growing in there, whatever disease inoculum that exists is going to be there in the fall. So we can tell them in the spring, here's what you need to plant in order to protect yourself and get top end yield. And we had some fantastic stories. I'll tell you one that came out of South Dakota this year. So we had a customer that worked with us last year, and all the agronomists in the area, the seed agronomists, the extension agronomists said there's no sudden death syndrome in this area. We've never seen sudden death syndrome. Well, if you see sudden death syndrome, you probably lost 50% of your yield already. Mm-hmm. So you really don't want to see it. Mm-hmm. And so we tested all of his fields. And this year, he planted a variety that was more resistant to sudden death. He used seed treatment at the maximum rate. He also was low on boron, so he applied boron 3 times during the year. And this year, he averaged 82. I asked him, and this was his soybean yield, obviously.
Yeah, right.
And I asked him, in your past 5 years, what's your best, yield that you've had off of these fields? He said 65. Just making these simple little changes. We're not telling people to use less or use more. We're just telling them where they need to protect and where they don't.
Okay, so in this particular example, Mike, you just grabbed 17 bushels of soybeans, at $15, and I'm trying to do the math in my head here, but the point is it's a whole bunch of soybeans. I'll do that math, but the main thing is, and you're on, is it just because of what you did? No, there's probably a couple other factors, but the point is, at $17 17 bushels at $15, I just grabbed $255 more dollars. Mm-hmm. And how much did I pay you to tell me that I had Sunday syndrome out there? How much did I pay to find this out?
About 3/4 of a bushel of soybeans.
$10.
Yeah, right around there.
$8.
We don't set the price to the customer, but it's about 3/4 of a bushel of soybeans, a little bit less than a bushel of soybeans, and he got 17 bushel more.
Mm-hmm. And then answer me this: he had to use some product. And so do you think your value proposition is we tell you that there's a problem you didn't know you had, and then you can treat it? Or do you think it's you're treating it unnecessarily, like the Southern Illinois example or Central Illinois example? You've been using products that you don't even have because that happens a lot. You go to the doctor and they say, why are you doing this? Well, I don't know. I thought I should. Well, you're wasting your time and you're wasting your money. Which one do you think is the bigger value proposition? Probably both.
It's both. There's an old saying that farmers have 40 years to guess right. And that's pretty much what happens when you're doing product selection. It's like, okay, I've used this variety. I've used this hybrid. I'm getting really good yield off of this. But you're trying to guess on the rest of it, like the biology of what is actually out there. And predictive agronomy enables the grower not to have to guess right on some of the biggest input decisions that they have to make.
Yeah. And the thing is, you're talking about not very much, and I know we don't get too much into the pricing part of it, but I just saved myself a whole bunch of money by treating it. How much do you think, and I want to get your thought on this, how much do you think is we love inputs? And if you go to the co-op, they want to sell you inputs. So I want you to ponder this for a quick second. How much do you think we're spending unnecessarily? And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to tell my listeners about something that I think is important to them. You've got this thing in your hands called a smartphone. You've had it for a long, long time. It's got more technology than the Apollo program, okay? All that ability right there. Yet you spend 19% of your time looking for information if you're a farmer. That's a true story. It's a stat from a reputable source. So anyway, my buddy Rob Syke, who founded AgVisor Pro, said, why don't you use this thing in your hand and get information more quickly? If you shorten time and distance, you will make more money. AgVisor Pro is an app that you can put on your smartphone. It's as simple as that. It's basically an expert network. Hey, I don't know how to handle this ragweed issue. It's very persistent. It's got herbicide resistance. How do I get rid of this? Boom, you've put that on there. You find someone that's a resistant weed expert on AgVisor Pro, and they can help you out. So go to AgVisor Pro on your phone. Just go to your little app store. It doesn't cost you nothing. And type in AgVisor Pro, and they'll give you the application on there. Connects decision makers in agriculture to the advice, professionals, and services that you need to move forward with confidence in your farming operation. AgVisor Pro. Okay. Is the bigger cost saving on, I tell you got South Dakota, I tell you, you found you had sudden death syndrome and I just made you 17 bushels. Is there also the case to be made we're using too much stuff? There's too many things out there, Mike. We go to the co-op, we load up the sprayer, whatever, and you're using stuff unnecessarily. Is that where the future goes? I guess I'm wondering which one you think is the bigger money and where does the future go? Because I can tell you where I think the future goes.
Yeah, my opinion on that is it's a both, right? I mean, we look at ROIs with some of our customers and it ranges anywhere from $50 up to hundreds of dollars, right? You've got some fantastic conventional hybrid corn that's out there, new stuff that's coming out from different companies. They don't have the stacked traits in them, but they sure as hell yield high. And so what I love about what we do is to be able to say, okay, you don't have to use a stacked trait on this field. You can put a racehorse on this one that you've never used before. Now, what is the measurement of that ROI? I mean, you're talking bushels and bushels, and then not to mention the pathogen loads and things that are in there. So I think the value is there. I think the value is the information. It is understanding the medium that you're putting all that money that you just invested in seed treatment and so forth and technology into that medium and understanding what is the right thing to put there.
By the way, I love it. You did a couple things there. You said the information is the gold here, and I know that we hear that all the time. The equipment companies, the all the data that's being harvested, and then the companies, and then the reluctance among some farmers, like, wait a minute, you're just mining me for my data. That's kind of a new thing. So I agree with that because, and I want to ask you where you think this goes. I want to ask you about the future, but before I do that, because while you're pondering this. You're doing the biggies right now. Mm-hmm. We're going to get better at this. If you and I both agree that soil is the new frontier, and we talked about it, you even sort of agreed, then corrected me on my numbers, which I'm glad you did because you know more about it. 10,000 bacteria, we've not even identified half of them or something like that within a shovelful of soil. I want to know what comes next. I want to know what comes next. I know we're not wrapping it up here, but I just want to know what comes next after Sudden-Descent syndrome and all that. But before you do, I want to ask you this question. I'm asking the listeners, really. Do you think we could find the guy in the seed business that came up with this whole racehorse thing? Because I want to smack the son of a bitch. I just heard Mike Tweedy call a seed variety a racehorse. You won't talk to a seed person that doesn't have a racehorse. Oh, it's a racehorse, 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 racehorse. So whenever I find the guy that started calling seed corn a racehorse, I want to pop him in the jaw. Anyway, what do you think about that, Mike?
Well, what I would say to that is that there is a secretariat that needs to be placed in each field, right?
Yeah.
So you're not going to guess right and place a secretariat in each field, but we give you enough information where you can probably get close to it.
Okay, answer me this, because you talked about stacks and you talked about stacked trades. My guys over at Extreme Ag, where I've got some of the most forward-thinking farm guys in the country, and they're working with a lot of trials and doing stuff. My buddy Kelly up in Iowa says, I really think that we've hit a point where paying huge amounts of money for stacked traits doesn't have the return anymore. He says, I can go and get, as you said, a conventional variety racehorse and then just treat a few things that I have a risk for, as you're talking about. And I saved a whole bunch of money on the seed that I can put into some other inputs and not put in. And that becomes pure profit. Is that really one of the promises of what you're doing?
Yeah, it is. And Kelly is a very wise man. We've got other growers, too, in Iowa that are utilizing this to do spot treatments for insecticides where they know that they have, trouble spots of corn rootworm instead of going a full triple stack. Now, that's up to them and their trusted advisor if they want to do that. But we are really giving a layer of data that can be used for prescription planting, prescription applications, and prescription scouting, where you can expect to see this problem arise. And then if you need to do a fungicide application, if you've got a fungus out there, then at least you'll know where to throw the drone up and be able to look and see, okay, am I starting to see expression? Okay, I better get a fungicide application on there.
I think that we're over applying most everything, especially the stuff that's been around forever, dry fertilizer. It was affordable, so we just flinged it everywhere. And then you talk about, well, was it actually getting in the plants? It doesn't matter, it's cheap. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's that way for some of these disease prevention things. Am I right? I mean, it's more expensive than it was, and with the cost of diesel and then manpower, et cetera. Is that what's going to drive you? Is it going to be the cost, or is it going to be the environmental pressure on us that we're going to have to be more judicious with our applications?
I think that is a side outcome, the environmental side. I think that is a side outcome. It is a beneficial outcome, but it is not the goal. The goal is let's give the grower, or provide the growers what they need to know about what is happening in their fields to improve top-end yield. Top-end yield is our North Star. We've got genetic potential for 200-300 bushels of soybeans. We've got genetic potential of 500 bushels of corn, but we're not anywhere close to that. And so the information that we're providing, and it goes deeper and deeper and deeper over time, is going to help them achieve that top-end yield. And when we achieve top-end yield, whether an input was used or it wasn't used is not really relevant to us. We just help the farmer.
You've got, and I agree with all that. I agree that it's going to be, and it's kind of a neat component when you think about it. Our understanding of soil, technology with companies like PatternAg doing predictive analytics, whatnot, and then the fact that we get more judicious with our inputs and use them where they need to be at the right rates they need to be versus just, it's a good security. It's a good, it's just a good insurance policy. And then also the money comes. So I agree with that. You've got a big ag report released in late January. So what I know you wanted to make sure you shared that. You finally are old enough. You're a 5-year-old company. You finally have really got enough, shall we call it critical mass that now it's like, yeah, we're not just promising you this. We can show you. We're in 12 states, whatever, 14 states. We got this going on. So kind of tell me about what you got to share with that.
Yeah, we've got a big, what's called, it's first of its kind predictive agronomy report. So think of it as like a farmer's almanac of what to expect with pathogen loads and what we're seeing in linkages in between weather. So we're really stacking multiple things, but we're looking specifically at some work that we did with the data that we had with our growers. And so here's a couple of the observations that I'll share with you that are going to be in the report that the listeners might find interesting. Yep. So we found very strong linkage between, and we have just a super sophisticated data science team that mines this data, but we have a very strong linkage between high spring, which was March, April of last year, 2021, rainfall. So and
by the way, we're recording this in 23. So when you say it was last year, so that the listener understands the data you're saying for purposes of the data you collected, because obviously we don't have 23 yet, because we're just right now sitting here and recording this in early 23. You're using 2021 weather patterns to then see what it did in 2022 because you have the results. So that's what we're hearing, right?
Yeah, and then we're using 2022 data, which is what I'm referring to right now. March, April moisture of 2022, as you recall, northern North Dakota had massive amounts of rainfall. There was a lot of prevent plant up there, but also so did the Midwest. And so we're seeing the linkages between that and the root rots and diseases that are going to be in the fields in this upcoming 2023 planting season. So the weather from the previous year is directly correlating to what the threat levels are going to be faced this coming season, right? And so what we're seeing is pretty high levels of Pythium, Fusarium, white mold, and sudden death syndrome. And we did a double click, on sudden death syndrome. We did a very large commercial trial because we feel like this is a disease that is far under studied. But we saw very elevated levels of SDS across the Midwest and, where we had that high spring moisture. We're seeing very elevated levels of inoculum going into the 2023 season. So, if the growers haven't had an opportunity to get their fields tested, they can still do that before the spring. But I would say the threat levels are very high. Interestingly, where we had dry weather in certain parts of the Midwest, we're seeing very high levels of gibberella stalk rot. That's not necessarily a disease that's on everybody's radar, like a pathogen like corn rootworm, but it definitely has an impact on it.
I'm looking at your notes here that we prepared a little bit here. High gibberella stalk rot, and then I'm like, they had dry conditions. And when you think of stuff that's rot, you always think it has to be from wet conditions. So are you seeing enough correlation to say it's causation? I mean, we know there's certain things that happen. Wet causes, I don't know, rust in your wheat or something like this. But are you seeing enough that you can do correlation equals causation? Or are you even seeing some things that like we always thought this and it's not necessarily proving out?
Yeah, well, we're seeing both actually, but in the cases of the diseases that I just cited, there is enough strong correlation between the weather data, moisture, and geophysical conditions of that soil to make those correlations. Interestingly, you mentioned over application of fertilizers. We're also seeing very low P solubilization in a lot of the fields across the Midwest. Now, why is that important? Okay. And how do we do that? Well, we're looking for the genetic pathways that break down rock phosphorus in the soil.
So low P solubilization, you can detect. Is that something that's unique to PatternAg, or is that something that any soil analysis would detect? I'm ignorant. I don't know.
No, that is unique to us because your regular chemistry analysis has about 10 data points. We're doing about 10 million data points.
Okay.
And if you recall, we're looking at the biology, we're looking at the genetic material in the soil. That biology, those genetic pathways are what break down rock phosphorus. Your typical chemistry test will tell you how much phosphorus is there, but it doesn't tell you if it's available or unavailable. And so that information is really important because we've only got about 60 years of phosphorus left to mine. And so input companies have got to develop products that can be applied in the field so that farmers can mine the phosphorus, the rock phosphorus that's in their soil. So they could be over applying phosphorus and they don't need to.
But again, I opened with that. Don't you think that we can say that about a lot of our inputs that we're
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. Because again, we're trying. It's not because anybody's trying to do anything nefarious. It's just that we're trying to guess right.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is provide that layer of data where you don't have to guess right anymore on so much of this stuff.
Yeah, I like it. So, what do you think then? If one of your value proposition, I keep going to that because let's face it, we're all out here trying to, say what can I do for you that makes you more money, and if I can make you money, then we're in business together. What are we talking about saving just in way of phosphorus with that analysis on low phosphorus solubilization that you're able to detect? Does that mean that I have to throw on more? Does it mean I just put on different methods? I change my practices of how I put it on? What do I do once you give me that information?
Well, if you've got low phosphorus solubilization, you want to look for biological products that are proven to put that put the material in the soil that will provide that genetic pathway to break that rock phosphorus down, right? It's not a matter of applying more. It's a matter of mining what you have there. And so, we look at products that exist in this space and, we try to help validate whether those products actually work. That's not our core business, but, we want to be able to provide some level of information to a grower to say, you have low phosphorus solubility. I mean, that's pretty rampant across Nebraska. If we look at our macro level data in Nebraska, you should be using a product that can break that rock phosphorus down, and then you don't have to apply so much phosphorus.
The other things that you are detecting, you talk about 10 million data points. It can be a little overwhelming, frankly. So unoverwhelm me. I'm the farmer. And I do a good job, and you're a little overwhelming to me. Unoverwhelm me by telling me what I need to know. And I think you can pretty much start with, you've been doing soil analysis. This is the next level. This is the third or fourth or seventh level, because we've already gotten better at soil analysis with grid sampling, et cetera, micronutrients we never even cared about. This is what, gradation 3, 5 of soil analysis, but now I'm still a little overwhelmed.
Yeah. So what we do that is really the elegant thing about our value prop is that we take what is very super complex. You talked about the amount of data points that we have. We take the very super complex, and then we look for very specific things within that soil. And then we turn that around into an extremely intuitive report that I could take it to, a kindergartner that could look at that data or look at our results and say, oh, my corn rootworm is red and the gradation on it is high. That means that, boy, I'm going to have to really protect for corn rootworm. We do the same thing for each one of the pathogens. We provide it back in a very intuitive report. So information in and of itself is interesting. If I spit out 10 million data points to you,
right.
You would look at that and say, okay, what the hell do I do with this? We take that super complex and we turn it around into something that's really intuitive, that the grower can visit with their trusted advisor and make easy decisions in about 10 minutes. Now, what typically happens is, they're going to look at that field and say, God, I never knew I had this, and I never knew this about it. And so then they find those things really interesting. So that's really the elegance of what we do, is taking the super complex and making it easy.
I like it, by the way, that you that's what you got to do. Frankly, I mean, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of moving parts, and you're saying I'm going to take this thing and make it so that you can understand it. And I also like your point that just finding a whole bunch of data if you can't use it. What's the old thing about doing wheelies on a tricycle? It's interesting, but what the hell purpose does it do? You've got enough track record now with being at it 5 years. You're rolling out something. So do we need to know more what's coming on this? On the results? I mean, because like I said, you finally have critical mass. Is there anything that I need to be looking for coming from you in the next 6 months or 3 months or 1 month on good information that I can all of a sudden say, oh, wow, this is a new frontier, but it's also now very easily explained. I can apply it to my operation?
Yeah, I mean, just the product that we have today is, really eye-opening for the growers that receive this data because they've never seen anything like this. I mean, we can do a typical chemistry analysis, Malik 3 test on that field too, but looking at it at a biological level, when you link all of those data points together and then create the story, that every field has a story and every field is a different story. And so what we look at today is like we look at chapter 1. Okay, well, I planted this. And then we look at the last chapter and here was yield. But you can't see any of the other chapters in the middle. And that's really what we do is we provide all that information back to them. So even now, we're still soil testing, even if the ground is frozen, we're still soil testing now. So if somebody wants to learn about what's happening in their field, what threat levels are there, even if they've already purchased their seed and seed treatment, at least they know what to scout for and what to look for in these fields. Now, the great thing about our product is it's ever evolving. Mm-hmm. Okay, what I mean by that is, I mentioned before, we're going to be adding root knot nematode. So every time we capture a pound of soil and we run that through our analytics, we take biology and turn it into gigabytes of data that goes up into the cloud. Once it's up in that cloud, we then just mine that data. It's all anonymized. We don't sell anybody's data. Right. We don't share anybody's data with anything. But what's interesting about that is when we turn on a new pathogen, when we write the algorithm, and after we do all the validation and all that kind of stuff, and we can turn on a new pathogen, it populates all past reports too. So if you stay with us for 5 years, or if you've been with us for 5 years, you'll have all of that stuff will past populate. In previous seasons. So then you really get a complete, picture. You get all the chapters of the story.
In the future, I mean, because right now you've got, again, critical mass. So you've got data, and I'm looking at one of your maps here while I'm talking to you. You basically have Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio. That's a real good footprint for you right now, right?
It is.
And you'd be confident telling me that you've got enough compelling data, enough. It's not little one-offs. You've like, hey, I've got enough data from this that I really think that we're starting to save some money, make some money, and have really good predictive analytics based on what we're seeing here, right?
Yeah. I mean, our footprint continues to grow. We are corn, soybean based, which means that we're heavily on the ground in the Midwest, but expanding down into the Southeast, the Mid-South, into Texas. So our footprint will continue to expand. But what's great about when you're working with something like big data is the more you get, the faster the flywheel turns, the faster the engine learns and creates more and more valuable information back to these growers. So it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's not static. It's constantly evolving and improving.
If I want to do business with you, this is the interesting thing. I told you when we started recording, before we started recording, let's not be too salesy because my listeners will call BS on this. And I opened with that. Now I got to ask you a question. If I want to do business with you, how do I? Because you're not out here selling to me. You don't come to my farm and sell me your services, right?
That's right. So the best way to learn more and to get in touch with a PatternAg dealer, because we go to market through dealers, and we work with some seed companies as well, is just to go to pattern.ag, pattern.ag. hook up with one of our field reps that are there, either our customer success folks or our regional sales manager, and they'll put you in touch with a dealer that's located in your area. And if you're interested in becoming a dealer, then you can also contact us that way too. But yes, we work through a trusted advisor network of crop consultants, seed dealers, and so forth, people that are very agronomically experienced to provide those recommendations based upon the output of what's in our reports.
I think we're going to leave it right there. I told you not to be too salesy. And then at the very end, I had you apparently so gun shy, I had to beg you to tell us how I could even buy your stuff. See how we worked that out, Mike?
It was beautiful.
All right. So it's pattern.ag, www.pattern.ag. They are my sponsor. But again, we didn't make this a sales promo. We made this about where I think the future is going this way. I think we're going to, like I said, I think we're going to look back and say, holy crap, can you believe how stupid we were? Well, we weren't stupid. We just didn't know. I mean, we just didn't have the tools at our disposal. We're going to get better about this in the future. And I think there's going to be another dozen things you're going to be predicting with your analytics in another couple of years.
Yeah. And, I would say if you're interested in learning more, look for the upcoming Predictive Agronomy report that we will be releasing at the end of that it should be available in February. And I believe that you will find some really interesting findings of what threats exist in the upcoming planting season.
Yeah, I think that's the cool thing is that it's like, here's what we saw and here's what we're predicting. And also it's kind of broad based because it's a big report over a couple dozen or a dozen states, but you can do it better on your footprint where you are. His name's Mike Tweedy. I don't even know your title. We've had dinner together and talked about business, and I don't even know what to call you other than Mr. Tweedy.
Head of sales.
Head of sales for PatternAg. I already told you how to go there. It's pattern.ag. www.pattern.ag. My name is Damian Mason. His name is Mike Tweedy, head of sales for PatternAg. And until next time, this is the Business of Agriculture. Well, that concludes another fantastic episode of the Business of Agriculture. This episode was brought to you by PatternAg. Everybody in agriculture understands the importance of soil health. We also keep an eye on our soil better than we ever did through advanced soil testing. But what if there was a company that provided predictive analytics, not just checking out nutrients and all the elements that are in there, but also could tell you the degree of risk you face with disease and pest pressure? That's right, PatternAg can do that. They actually can tell you, hey, you're going to have a real issue here. You can proactively treat for corn rootworm or cyst nematode or sudden death syndrome before the problem actually starts costing you yield. Go to pattern.ag, that's www.pattern.ag, to find the nearest rep that can help you start doing better for your soil.